you've got to get to a point that you control your own future. Because when you at this point, any change of market conditions, any change of investor sentiment, who knows what can happen, is you've got to figure out how to navigate the unexpected moments. Building businesses is really hard. This is the number one problem in companies. It's not that things break and it's not that things go wrong. They're going to break and go wrong. That's life. The question is, what happens next?
This is your Real Estate Syndication Show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we welcome back guest Jason Ilian. And if you caught our last conversation, you know, it was a masterclass on faith, leadership, building a legacy, just beyond wealth. And today, we're going to dive even deeper this time into focusing on some scaling and raising capital and just how purpose and faith drives all of those things in a very specific ways, and even big mistakes that Jason looks back on and has learned from and is teaching us, right? And helping us to learn from those as well. I'm very grateful for his insights he shared today and just the experience that he brings. Jason, honored to have you back on the show. I was just sharing with you, I just really align with your priorities, your faith, and how you lead with that in all aspects of your life, from parenting, which we actually got into quite a bit during the last episode. And I love that because I love learning from men like you that are ahead of me in many ways. But today I want to transition more to business and some different things that's happened in business for you and raising capital and different partnerships that may have gone well or not. But thank you for coming back.
Yeah, of course. It's great to see you. And knowing that you have 2 kids under the age of 2, thanks for squeezing me in, because I know you're probably exhausted and super busy. So it's great to see you, man.
You as well. Well, I know, Jason, that, you know, there was a moment, and maybe numerous moments for you, I don't know, but where the, investor, per se, pulled the rug out, right? They, maybe they promised one thing and then they kind of reversed their course of actions, right? Or maybe forcing you into some tough decisions. I'd love to dive into that because I think we can all learn from that. It's probably happened to a lot of us in one form or another, but could you just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think some people forget we've kind of had like a 13-year bull market run, right? Where money was somewhat free and people were raising capital, and it made us all look really smart, right? Whether you were an entrepreneur or an investor, it was like money was just flying all over the place. And I remember a few years ago where you were seeing 2 or 3 deals getting done a week and very little diligence, and people were throwing out, multi-million dollars and signing in it. And it was because it was just an easy market. There's too much money, too much capital floating around. But it hasn't always been like that, right? And we're in a new time again where it's not like that again. And so that reminds me, especially us old guys that have scars and have been through the ringer a couple times, is my first company. When we were raising capital for our first company, we had a large institutional client that had promised to basically do the funding in 2 tranches. So 2 large tranches. And we had a board, and we were spending money, and the board was like, spend faster because you guys are growing. And I was hesitant, but the board's trying to push us to spend money faster. And as we were just continuing to spend money, almost despite myself and being young and naive to this, then the 2008 crisis hit. And our investor came back one day and just said, we're not funding the next tranche. And we were within 90 days of running out of cash, right? Like, we expected to have almost another 2 years of cash coming to us in 90 days, and we didn't have it. Talk about, a kick in the private parts, right? Just to say like, hey, what's happening? And everything was going well. Our company was growing, right? We had great traction. But all of a sudden, we're about to run out of money. I'm always helping entrepreneurs and executives think about, like, you've got to get to a point that you control your own future. Because when you, at this point, any change of market conditions, any change of investor sentiment, who knows what can happen? The rug can get pulled out from underneath you. And when it does, it forces you to make tough decisions. And in my scenario, it forced me to take our company and basically, fire almost 100 people and within a couple weeks. And the hardest part was those were my friends. I remember having to come up with this game plan and literally talking to everybody at the company and saying, you go to this room and you go to that room. And the people didn't know which room they were going into, right? And we had to let 100 people go. And in that 100 people were good family friends, people we lived next to, people we went to church with, and all sorts of things. And I just remember going back to my office and crying, right? Like, like what just happened. But it was a tremendous moment of learning for me, right? Which I would have to learn that way again, but just a tremendous moment of learning of like, hey, you've got to structure your companies and you've got to do things in such a way that you can control your own future or at least put yourself on a path to be successful. And at that point, we hadn't done that yet. And I was kind of believing the Silicon Valley playbook of like, we'll just keep growing at all costs and there'll be more money for you. That is not the case, right? That is not, I shouldn't say that is not always the case. Sometimes it works, but in my experience, the majority of time, people are not going to be throwing capital at you.
I love how you mentioned you have to get to a point where you control your own future. Speaking to that a little bit, how you got there, like from because especially when you're raising capital, I mean, you feel like your investors are, I mean, obviously they're a big part of your future. How did you transition to that, and what does that look like?
So I think it's different for different companies about what controlling your own future looks like. But I really think it's getting to a place where not only are you generating enough free cash that the business keeps running, but you have the right kind of leaders around you to actually grow the business. And it's not just about the capital. That's certainly a piece of it. And if you don't have it, you can't pay people, right? So that's a piece. But the other piece is how do you put other people around you as a leader that have shared vision and values and complementary capabilities. And I think one of the mistakes I made when I was young is often I think people naturally look for people that are like them. They think like them, they act like them, they walk like them. When the reality is you need people that have the same vision, but have different capabilities. It's to use the body of Christ analogy of like, you're the hand, you need a foot, right? If you're the leg, you need an arm. And so you've got to really piece together and pull together a comprehensive team that has different capabilities. And you don't want them all to agree with you, right? You want them to respectfully disagree. And because that's where they really iron sharpens iron, right? I think we talked about this before. It's iron sharpens iron. It's not pillow fluffs pillow, right? So you've got to have brave people that are willing to speak out, that have different ways of looking at things. And when you have those right people in place, then you typically position yourself well to go be successful. It doesn't guarantee it. There's no guarantee. But I think the best entrepreneurs and executives, they just want a shot. They're not asking for a guarantee. They just want a shot. And if they put the right people around them, I think they put themselves in a good position.
So I want to get to that where you had to lay so many people off, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But in that moment, who were the key leaders around you, not by name, but maybe by title or skill sets, something like that, that were just very influential in that moment?
Yeah. And so I will tell you, this was one of the first companies that I ran. And, if I'm rating myself in hindsight, I'm probably getting a C or a D, right? Like, I don't think I did an amazing job. You can probably call some of the people and they'll fill you in on that. But I think I was young and naive and didn't really understand how to run a company yet. And we grew really fast, right? We grew from, at the time, we were an online software company. We had 1 month, we had 20,000 users. The next month, we had 2 million, right? So we grew really fast. A couple of key people that I did have around me that I was fortunate to have, I had kind of a chief marketing officer who was not only really strong at helping tell the story of our firm, but also really good with people, right? So he did a great job of being able just to sit down and hear people out, which I think is a real gift. Like if you're able to listen well and really understand people's concerns, because people may say they're upset about X, Y, and Z, but it really could be ABC, right? That's affecting X, Y, Z. So I thought he was really good. And we also had somebody on the sales side that was really good at just building long-term relationships. And as we were navigating these waters, I needed people to bounce ideas, thoughts, emotions off of. And they were both key at helping us do that.
What about, I'll dive in here just a little bit. How did you raise this capital or so much capital for this venture, being brand new, being young, brand new startup?
This was a time where when you're growing something early on, you have to show growth somewhere, right? It's either growth in revenue, growth in users. Something's got to be growing if you want to really attract capital. And I think that there have been pockets of time in the venture world where you just had to have a really good idea and you'd get some funding. I think those days are past, right? I think that good investors now are typically looking for, hey, show me some growth, show me, some early clients, show me some revenue, show me something that you're on this path. Now, when you're really early on, you typically only have a couple, right? Because you can't really draw a line yet on 10 things because that's why you're early stage. But as you continue to grow, you need to have, dozens of clients or lots of data points to draw a line with. For us at the time, the reason that we were able to attract more capital is we had a lot of user growth. And we grew really fast. People really attracted to our platform. And so when you're growing really fast and there's a lot of buzz around you, that's what kind of brings in the investors. And we also had a large addressable market. And because of that large addressable market and us growing fast, investors' eyes got big and said, hey, here's what you can go do. But I think one thing I always try to remind, both as an investor now and as, previously entrepreneur, building businesses is really hard. Some people once I have the money, then I'm good to go. I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. Like building a long-term value-driven business is hard because one, if there is value there, others are going to see it and they're going after it too. But two, even if you do find your product market fit and people are excited about what you got to deliver, and you got to deliver well every day. It's got to be a consistent experience. That's where I get places like Amazon a lot of credit. Like, I don't know how long you've been like a Prime customer, but it's like clockwork. I order it, it comes in, it's done well. If I got a problem, they're fixing it immediately. And I very rarely have a problem. And so they've just done such a great job of being consistent in their growth. And I think that's really hard. And so getting to that point, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of teamwork.
Let's jump into the crisis where you had to lay all these people off, and maybe some of the thought process beforehand, knowing this was going to have to be done. I assume it's because, hey, we're going to run out of cash if we don't do this. Is that right?
That's right.
You talked about, hey, someone in this room. Maybe some of the thought process is moving up to that and knowing, hey, this has to be done. I've got to lead in this way. And then that decision of who stays, who goes, what that looks like to move forward.
You're kind of in the situation where you're like, do I cut off a foot? Do I cut off an arm? Like, what do I cut off? Because clearly you have all these people here and you need them in some way, shape, or form. It's a tough decision to start to say, like, what do you need less at that moment? Like, what can you build back to, or what can you regrow? And that also comes with tough decisions about, like, well, the people you keep also, do some of them have to take pay cuts? And so there's a bunch of different moving decisions that have to be made at the same time. Now, every once in a while, certain companies are fortunate enough that they just kind of got fat and there's easy cuts to make. But even in the environment that we're in today, and I'm talking to a lot of companies that have had a tough time these last couple of years, they're past the easy cuts, right? They're now cutting into flesh and bone. Like, they got the fat cut off already. And now that's coming to the tough decisions. And that's where we were. Right? We were in this tough decision of, do I cut off an arm? Do I cut off a foot? And I literally had to go through with a couple of my, key generals, person by person, to say, what is the right combination of people that we need to have to keep the body alive? And it's hard, right? It's a really hard process to go through. And it teaches you a lot. It's like a lot of things in life, right? The things that you fail at are the places you learn. We talk about that with our kids all the time. Like, when they're winning games, it's fun. Winning's fun, but losing teaches you something. And that was where we were, right? We were in the losing situation of like, okay, now what are we going to learn from this? And, we learned business is hard. We learned that you have to figure out who kind of the real essential key roles are. You have to learn how to communicate well, which, I think we did as good as we could have, but I'm sure in hindsight, there were probably lots of people that said, well, why didn't you tell me earlier? And I was like, well, I didn't know earlier. And so there's all of those things that kind of come into these decisions. And it's triage, right? It's like when the patient is wheeled in from a gunshot wound, you don't have time to discuss what kind of gun it was. You just have to figure out how to get the bullet hole fixed.
Right.
That's where we were, right? Like, whatever happened before, we can discuss that later, but we don't have time for that. We've got 90 days, and in 3 days we have 87 days. Okay. You felt it. You felt the clock going down.
Speak to maybe how you cared for those friends, right? Those employees in that moment, and maybe a way, whether it was handled that way or not, then even looking back, thinking, man, I wish I'd have said it this way, or cared for them in this way, or I've had to let people go, and it's like it's hard. I care about them, right? Or they've been with me a long time, or care about their family. But just wonder, I don't know, any advice through that learning experience and just in leading in that moment and caring for your people?
It's always, I think this is the same discussion you have when you're with your kids is when you're leading a family, you're trying to make decision, how much information do I share that is transparent and how much do I keep away just for safety? You're skidding down a hill full of ice when you're driving a car. You don't want your kids to know like you're a little out of control, right? So you just kind of make fun of it. Like, hey, we're skidding down a hill. Which inside you're like, we're skidding down a hill on ice, right? And there's a little bit of that when you're leading a company too, of like, when you have a tough board meeting, how much of that do you share with the company and the firm? Because you can't freak everyone out because then they either freeze up or leave. But you also want to share the right amount of concern. And so it takes discernment as a leader to know, like, how do I know what information to share and to what degree? When you look back at those opportunities, there's always room to improve, right? There's always room to improve on what those things are. And, I look back on, we tried to have, even though we had to quickly make decisions and cutting nearly 100 people, we tried to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with a number of those people as well, right? Because they had questions. And we wanted to sit down with as many of them as we could and have those conversations. I think we answered some of the questions well, and some of the things we just couldn't even share yet because we didn't even know like how this was going to go down with our current investors. And so it's a tough conversation to like try to answer somebody's questions when you don't have the answer yet either. But I think that's where just kind of empathy comes in and trying to meet them where they are. And I think one of the best things we tried to do was people we were letting go were like, we're happy to call 10 companies on your behalf. Like we started reaching out to everybody. We made calls, we sent emails, we reached out to friends. We did everything we could to try to replace our people as fast as possible. Unfortunately, there were a lot of really good people. I think nearly everybody found a place to land, but it was just uncomfortable for everybody, right? Nobody expected that. So we tried to go above and beyond. And that's when you're working 20-hour days, right? You're spending 16, 15, 16 hours of your day trying to get your business right. You're spending the next 5 trying to take care of your people that are leaving. And you're trying to take care of them just because you care. Like there's no business upside for doing that. The upside is just that you should care about people. And that's why we get it. It was like, those people, they're friends, right? They're people that worked hard to pour into the company and we want to try to take care of them.
I know that's an old wound and I won't keep diving in there, but I'm grateful for your willingness to share.
Oh, of course.
From your experience. I think it should speak to all of us in a big way. Yeah, I mean, you had to make a decision quickly, right? You didn't have time to think about it too much, right?
I think the big learning too is like, I may not have been in that position had we grown the team slower, right? So the real learning was like, I should have trusted my initial instinct to say, we don't need this many people this fast. That was a push that the board was giving us because they're like, we'll grow faster, add bodies, right? And so had we not grown that fast, and by the way, I wasn't the original CEO. There was a gentleman before me that was the original CEO. So he helped grow the team faster. And so I didn't have full control over that, but but in hindsight, I could have managed that better when I got in the chair, right? I could have slowed it down, maybe even let some people go early to manage our cash situation, but I didn't know. I mean, to be honest, that was the case. I didn't know that this was coming. And because it was my first time running a firm of this size, I wasn't used to seeing a bus come around the corner and hit me.
I think at that time, a bus came around and hit lots of people. I know you talk often about you're looking for, say, platforms, not just products. And I think maybe you've mentioned this, like the disruption is, say, the willingness to shoot yourself in the foot before the market shoots yourself in the chest. So maybe I think that was you that said that. Yeah, I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit. And I think it's in the same vein as like making what makes a great company, right? And disrupt themselves type of thing. So what does that mean? And how do we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good way to think about it in this environment is everybody's talking about AI, AI this and AI that. And you can continue to sit there and run your company the software company or any type of company the same way you always can. Or you can go dive into AI yourself and figure out how to apply it to your business, right? And whether that's from customer service or better sales models or understanding or leads or like AI can do so many incredible things now. I mean, I was talking to my son last night at dinner and nobody's supposed to be using AI in the school situation, right? In high schools, everybody is, right? So what they're doing is they're literally using a chat GPT or a Grok and they're going to it and they're saying, give me, 4 paragraphs on early volcanoes. And it'll spit out 4 paragraphs and then they'll say, dumb it down for a freshman language, right? Like, they're getting it so that they can basically not have to write the paper. Well, in one hand, you could say, well, that's terrible. The other hand, you could say, wow, that's really innovative. Like, they're learning how to use these tools in a way that they have to. And I think it's the same thing for business people. It's like, you may have always run your business a certain way, but that's not the environment that we're going to live in here. And so how do you leverage these two? How do you disrupt yourself by just diving in and say, there's nothing wrong with my business today, but how do I make it better? Right? How do I accelerate it? And I think the best business owners and entrepreneurs are doing that. They're saying, like, I'm not waiting to get hit by that bus speeding around the corner that I don't see. I'm going to go right now and inject this into my own company. And it's way better when it's done on your own terms and your own accord than when something's happening to you. Same thing when you go to the doctor's office. It's better to go and catch something early. Like, oh, there's a bump there. I ought to, I'm gonna have it looked at, versus waiting, hey, that's cancerous. And so I think it's the same thing for business owners and leaders. Like, go early, like, be innovative. And honestly, it's just a faith-based component too. We are called to be bold leaders. And if that's the case, we should be bold all the time versus waiting for something to come up and catch us from behind.
How are you doing that right now for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think ours is like when we started our new firm, I'm Out Capital. We were bold by stepping out when other people weren't building new firms. That was step one. Then we started doing deals like we did Dude Perfect, a year and a half ago, and people were like, this is kind of crazy. It's the creator economy. Fast forward another 16 months, and now Mr. Beast is raising around at 5 billion, right? And people are like, this is the place to be. Well, we were here, a year and a half ago, when people thought it was nutty and why is a young firm like yours doing this? So I think we were being bold. We were taking risks and taking the appropriate risks, right? You don't want to just throw caution into the wind. You need to do your homework, but you also need to be bold and take some chances. I don't think any of us sit on our deathbed and wish we didn't do things. We sit on deathbed and said, man, I wish we did these things. I wish we tried these things. We should have taken a shot at playing the guitar or learning how to ski or doing whatever, right? And I think it's the same thing for business. It's like, if you feel led to go do that, take the extra effort, take the extra work, take the evening, the weekend, the time, ruthlessly prioritize your schedule so that you can go after some of those things that could be really, really be special, because it's what makes great businesses.
I love that question. As far as if you're on your deathbed, what are you going to wish you had done? No doubt about it. We're going to have lots of thoughts like that if we have the opportunity. On the same train of thought about Dude Perfect, let's talk about that a minute. I know you really helped lead the choice to invest $100 million, I think, into Dude Perfect, and what gave you the conviction and to move forward with such a bold move, like you said.
Well, so we had a lot of reservations going in. I mean, I always tell people, and even the dudes, I'm like, when we first met you guys, I thought there's not a chance we're investing, right? Then as we got a chance to kind of pop over the hood of the car and look at their core businesses, I was like, wow, there's really something here. The key factor for me was the 5 dudes. It was the guys themselves. When we had a chance to sit down with them, hear their conviction, understand how hard they worked. And then I remember looking one of the guys in the eye, Tyler, who's kind of one of the lead dudes. And I just said, hey, what's stopping you guys from just retiring and hanging out on the beach one day? And he just said, Jason, listen, we go to the Super Bowl, we play golf at the Masters, we hang out with kids every day. He's like, going to the beach would be boring compared to our day jobs. I've got the best job on the planet. I just want to help more families in this. And when I heard their conviction, I'm like, I'm in. Like, if you guys are convicted to go do this and you're willing to go and sacrifice like this, then I'll go with you. Right? I'll sacrifice with you. And I wanted to hear that kind of commitment that they had. And everything that they've done to date has lived up to that, right? They've been as much in this as we are. But that created a lot of conviction on our team side to say, hey, yeah, this is something special. How special it is, we'll see. But it's been great to be part of it so far.
That's awesome. What kind of I know you were talking about how you heard their convictions and you thought, okay, like you just mentioned, that you were on board at that point. Probably not everybody was on board just because of that. Is that accurate? Or I just wondered how you kind of handled those conversations to say, hey, this is a good decision because of this.
Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, it wasn't just one conversation. It was a number of things that built us up to that conversation. To me, that was my turning point. But there was a lot of homework that was done behind the scenes of like, how big's the market? What is the core competencies of this team? Like, what are the opportunities to grow? Like, we did a lot of hope. We built financial models. We did diligence on the guys, the team, the area. We did all of that beforehand. All of those pieces we're building up. No, just like any businesses, there are risks involved, right? And so we have to sit in a room and look at each other and say, are you okay absorbing these risks? Because people often say, well, we want to mitigate, get rid of risk. You don't get rid of risk. You figure out how do you absorb risk profitably. And if you're going to absorb more risk, you get more upside for it, right? And so we had to sit in a room and say, there are risks here. Like, what if a plane goes down and kills all my talent, right? What if the YouTube model breaks or YouTube changes something, right? Like, so there are risks involved in these things. Now, we went through each one and made a determination of what we could do to offset and absorb some of those. But the reality is anything you go into, nobody thought COVID was coming, right? And that crushed live events, right? There's all sorts of black swan events and other things that pop up. And that's part of the risk of being an investor or building a business, right? Is you've got to figure out how to navigate the unexpected moments.
Transitioning a little bit, Jason, I know it's important for you to push towards, say, significance over success, and I'd love just to hear some of your thoughts behind that, and maybe even how that aligns with the people you're partnering with, or how their values align. We'll get into that, but first, maybe how that's transitioned for you. Maybe early on it was focused on more worldly success, but now it's changed to maybe through a different lens. What does that look like?
I think I would tell you if I was interviewing my 20-year-old self that I cared more about significance and success then, just like I do now. I don't think I actually understood how to get there as well. And not that I have it all figured out today, but I think that even back then, I realized that, money wasn't going to get you there, right? I've met billionaires. I've seen people that have built tremendous businesses and their lives are a wreck, right? Like I wouldn't trade my life for that. So I knew early on that, not that money's evil, but the love of it can be. Right? It's a wonderful way to help you, but it's a terrible master. And so I understood that early on, but I think it took time for me to really understand. To get there, you have to have like-minded, values-aligned, and vision-aligned people around you that are running the same direction. And that's taken many iterations throughout my career to say, I think it's easy for us to jump into a situation and say, well, they're almost there. Like these people are almost the kind of people I want to work with, right? And like, it's going to be okay. Anytime that I've found myself having to like give an excuse, it hasn't really gone well over time, right? I've kind of had to, in our house or in our team, we often say, that gut instinct that you have, that's really just the Holy Spirit trying to warn you about something. You may not be able to articulate it, but that gut instinct is the Holy Spirit saying, yeah, check yourself at this door before you walk through it. And over time, I've tried to do a better job of like, every once in a while, I just get that kind of gut instinct. I'm like, wait, something's not right. And I try to listen now. I didn't always do that, right? It was kind of like, no, I'm tough. I can figure this out. Yeah. Pride, that'll bring you down, right? That thing of like, I can just gut through it, especially when there are counselors and the Holy Spirit and things trying to guide you otherwise. And so I think I do a better job of putting good people around me. And if you look at our firm at High Mount, the executives there, they're all vision and values aligned. We all march the same way, right? We care deeply about each other and our families, as well as the business side. So we want to be excellent at home. We want to be excellent in ministry. We want to be excellent in our jobs. We're not willing to give on any of those things. And then two is like just continuing to be in the Word of God, have biblical principles that guide us and all that we do. And if something doesn't align with those biblical principles, we just don't do it. I don't care what the numbers say. I looked at a deal recently where the numbers look great. And as we were doing our homework, we found out that the CEO was sleeping with his secretary and he's married. We just dropped the deal on the spot. I'm just like, we're done. I'm like, I don't care what the numbers say. If he's willing to do that at work, what else is he willing to do? Lie in his numbers on a board deck, launder money offshore. I'm like, I'm not even gonna play with that anymore. When I was younger, I may have been like, well, it doesn't affect the business as much, like, no, that's done. That's a character trait. And that character trait is like, how much cyanide needs to be in that water you just drink for it to kill you. I think I've learned over time, probably because of failures, of how to do that better. And hopefully I'll continue to learn. I'm sure there are things, if you interview me a year from now, I'll say like, yeah, that wasn't the wisest decision. I've learned, and hopefully I'm improving in that area as well.
No doubt, hard decisions, right? When and you find out something like that as well. But or actually, I almost think it's not that difficult. Like it's like no, you learn that about that executive, and it could have been a number of issues, right, or sin
Sure.
in his life, but and shows that man, maybe even the documents he's already given you haven't been accurate.
You don't know what to believe.
I love how you mentioned, hey, your leadership team, you're all walking the same beat. Obviously, have different skill sets, and you're all bringing different things to the table. Has there been times where maybe there's even been leadership that said, "Hey, we need to hire this person. We need this person on staff. They're amazing at this thing that we need, whatever." But that person's values didn't align potentially, and how do you navigate that?
Well, so I think there's just two questions here. The first one is like, if you get a lot of um, A players, passionate A players, even vision and value aligned, you're going to create friction, right? Like, it is not going to move smoothly all the time, because people that are hard driving people that are want to get stuff done, and they're going to disagree. And so our team disagrees. And so I think when you ask people like, what's the hardest part about marriage? And I often say it's communication. I'm like, it's not communication. We all know we communicate differently. The hardest part is conflict resolution. What happens when the communication breaks down? This is the number one problem in companies. It's not that things break, and it's not that things go wrong. They're going to break and go wrong. That's life. The question is, what happens next? And that's where this conflict resolution and really understanding kind of a Matthew 18 principle. Like, I don't go to talk to one of my partners about the other partner. I go directly to my partner that I got the problem with and say, hey, here's my concern. I'm going to own my part of this deal. Like, here's where I think I could have done a better job on this. I need to hear your heart on this, and working through it. And when companies get really good at doing that in real time, then you can make progress. The problem is things fester. People don't talk about it. They just wipe it under the rug. And now I don't talk to this partner. I just talk to this one. Something goes wrong, it's his fault, not mine. Like, that's where things really start to have issues, right? And so what I would say is, like, in our firm, we try to do a great job of like, hey, when there's disagreements, we quickly come to the table and say like, hey, we're going to talk this out. We are going to come to a conclusion. And let's not get to finger pointing. Let's get to pointing the finger back at ourselves to say, like, what piece of this do I need to own so that we can make further progress? So the first part's definitely, and I'm a big fan of saying, hey, it's not communication, it's conflict resolution.
Such great advice, man. Going right to that person, right, and just saying where you messed up as well. Taking some ownership, some humility goes such a long ways. No doubt about it. In marriage too, by the way.
Well, I mean, like you said, you have two little ones. Your wife's probably exhausted sometimes, so it's going to create natural areas for conflict, right? Lots of surface area that can be hit for conflict, and so you have to figure out how to work through those. But that's no different than a work environment, and so we have to be able to figure out how to do that same concept in all aspects of our lives.
Jason, being a just a man of faith and just really leading just with your faith first. Speak to some spiritual disciplines that you have, whether it's a daily routine or weekly, or things that really help you to stay in alignment with the Lord in all these hard decisions.
It's a great question, and what I would tell you is, like, I am constantly striving to do all my routines better and more consistently, right? And I say that because I'm at the stage of life where I have 3 teenagers as well, and a fairly intensive job, and an amazing wife, but who also runs 1,000 miles an hour. And then all the things of other family and life that happens, right? But what I've really found is anytime that I can be in the Word of God consistently on a daily basis, ideally in the morning, right? So I'm spending some time, whether that's 5 minutes or 30 minutes. Some people often say like, well, how long do I have to be in the Word? To me, it's more about like, at what point does something actually penetrate you? Like, is something you read or listen to, whatever, like penetrate and change you? That could be 30 seconds in, right? It could be 30 minutes. Like, read until you have your aha moment, right? That kind of thing. So being in the Word, being consistent in prayer, which to me is a harder one, if you want to know the truth. Probably too prideful at times. Like, I can do this myself. Versus my wife's really good about being on her knees and being like, let's pray for them. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that like 5 days ago. So consistent with prayer, and then also being surrounded by other godly men. I mean, fortunately, in our firm, the other two leaders are godly men, and so we have prayer time every Monday before we start our work week, and we're constantly talking through things. And so I think who you surround yourself with is really, really important, right? Your playmates in your playground. If things aren't going well, change your playmates in your playground. But for us, having those godly men that I work with as well, and also the ones I reach out to that are kind of my first area of defense. And here's the thing that I found in business and life is that somebody has to go first. And what I mean by that is, like, most of the phone calls I'm on, whether they're with families or investors or companies, they're afraid to take the first step to talk about their faith or like be faith forward or just even address family issues. But if I go first, people just open up. And they often come back and they're like, that was the best conversation I've had all week, all month, all whatever. And it was just me being transparent. It wasn't anything brilliant on my part, right? It was just allowing the Lord to use the moment to address things that were important versus saying, hey, let's talk about that revenue line, or like, when are you going to ship that thing? Or like, we'll get there. But like, that's not going to matter if your life's falling apart, right? Like, and that doesn't help anybody. And so starting with those conversations on a daily basis and really just knowing, like, when I let my light shine, I automatically allow others to let their light shine. That's been the part of my job that I love the most, is like when people come back and say, like, man, I really needed that. And, I've had probably 3 or 4 of those conversations in the last week, which I'm just grateful that I had even the opportunity to have them.
Jason, I'm so grateful to have had you back on the show, and the time goes so fast. So much to talk about and learn from you. It's very grateful for your time again. How can the listeners learn more about you, High Mount Capital, and anything else you got going on?
Yeah. I mean, the easy thing is, always just go to our website at highmountcap.com to see there. We're also on Twitter, and, I'm on LinkedIn a lot because I like to just try to help people connect, because I really think this intersection of family and your profession and your faith, right? They're not 3 different pillars. They work together, right? And so on those places, we're trying to always share things that are not only encouraging from the business side, but hopefully encouraging the life and drawing people back in the Word. So probably LinkedIn's probably the best, but hit me up on Twitter at Jason Illian as well.
Awesome. That's a wrap, Jason. Thank you.